There is something you do that almost nobody notices. You apologize for taking up space. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You apologize before asking a question, after asking a question, and sometimes for apologizing too much. You say sorry when you're not sure you've done anything wrong. You say it reflexively, automatically, the way other people say hello, and somewhere underneath all of it, you've started to wonder if something is fundamentally off about you. The world has a word for this. Overly sensitive, insecure, passive. People tell you to stop apologizing so much, as if the habit is a simple switch you simply haven't thought to flip. They make it sound careless, easy to fix, and so you apologize for that too. But psychology tells a completely different story. Apologizing too much is rarely about bad manners or weak character. It's a pattern, a protective one built long before you had the words to understand what it was doing for you. There are 5 deep psychological traits that develop in people who apologize constantly, not from guilt, but from something far older and more layered than that. And once you understand them, you'll finally stop treating your own language as a flaw. The first trait is the one that started before you could name it. Trait 1. Your nervous system learned that harmony was your responsibility. It didn't happen in a single moment. It accumulated. The tension in a room that only you seemed to notice. The mood that shifted before anyone said a word. The subtle but unmistakable signal that someone nearby was unhappy, and the equally clear signal that it was somehow connected to you. You learned, the way children learn things they were never explicitly taught, that when the emotional temperature around you dropped, your job was to bring it back up. The apology was the fastest tool you had. Psychology links this to a concept called emotional hypervigilance. In practice, it means your nervous system became exquisitely tuned to the emotional states of other people, not as a skill you developed, but as a survival response to an environment where emotional unpredictability had real consequences. You didn't choose to become this attuned. Your nervous system chose it for you, because staying ahead of someone else's discomfort felt safer than being caught off guard by it. And so the apology became a preemptive shield, not an admission of guilt, a regulation tool, a way of lowering the emotional stakes before they had a chance to rise. That's not weakness. That's a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. The cost is that it never quite learned when to stop. Trait 2. You feel other people's discomfort as if it were your own. You walk into a room and something shifts in your chest before you can even name why. Someone is quiet in a way that feels pointed. Someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes. Someone's shoulders are carrying something invisible, and you feel the weight of it land somewhere in your own body before they've said a single word. Psychology calls this somatic empathy, the experience of absorbing another person's emotional state, not just intellectually, but physically. For people with highly active mirror neuron systems, the boundary between what you feel and what the person next to you feels becomes genuinely permeable. In simple terms, you don't just understand that someone is upset. You feel it as if some part of it belongs to you. And when you feel someone else's discomfort as your own, apologizing makes perfect sense. It's not performance. It's an attempt to resolve something you are genuinely physically experiencing. You apologize because the other person's tension feels like your tension, and the fastest way to release it is to offer the one thing that historically brought the temperature down. If this already feels uncomfortably accurate, you're in exactly the right place. This channel exists for people whose inner worlds are more complicated than the surface ever shows. If you want psychology that explains how you're wired, instead of suggesting you rewire yourself, subscribe. There's more here that was made for you. Trait 3, you were taught that your presence required justification. This is the one that lives deepest and announces itself least clearly. Somewhere in your history, not necessarily in a single dramatic moment, but through accumulation, through the atmosphere of a particular environment, you absorbed a message so quiet it barely registered as a thought. Being here needs to be earned. Taking up space needs to be earned. having needs, having opinions, having wants that might inconvenience someone else. All of it needed to be carefully managed, pre-apologized for, softened before it arrived. Psychology describes this through the framework of internal working models, the unconscious templates for relationships and self-worth that form in childhood and continue to shape adult behavior. When a child's environment consistently communicates, implicitly or explicitly, that their presence is conditional on being agreeable, easy, and low maintenance, the internal working model that forms is one where existence itself requires constant justification. The apology becomes that justification. It says, "I see that I'm here. I'm making myself smaller so you know I know that. I'm accounting for my presence before you have to ask me to." That is not weakness. That is an adaptation. A sophisticated, painful, deeply human adaptation to an environment that didn't always have room for the full version of you. Trait 4. You have an unusually finely tuned moral compass that runs ahead of your actions. Most people apologize after they've done something wrong. You apologize before, for things you might do, for possibilities you've imagined, for impact you can't yet confirm, but are already certain you must have caused. This is not guilt in the traditional sense. This is something psychology calls conscientious depth, a trait found in people who process the ethical dimensions of their actions at unusual speed and with unusual thoroughness. You think several steps ahead in terms of how your words might land, how your presence might burden someone, how your request might impose. And because you process all of that before anyone else has even registered a problem, the apology arrives first. It's not reactive, it's anticipatory. Your moral imagination is simply faster than the moment. This makes you someone who rarely causes harm carelessly. It makes you someone who holds themselves to a standard most people never consciously apply to themselves. It also makes you someone who is perpetually several steps into a conversation's emotional consequences before the conversation has even begun. And that is exhausting in a way that is almost impossible to explain to someone whose mind doesn't work this way. Trait 5. Apologizing is how you maintain connection when you're not sure you deserve it. This is the quietest trait, and it carries the most weight. Underneath the reflexive sorry, underneath the nervous laugh and the quick retreat and the softening of every sharp edge before it can be perceived as sharp, there is often a belief so old it doesn't feel like a belief anymore. It feels like truth, and the belief is this: I am too much or not enough, or some unstable combination of both. And connection requires constant management to maintain. Psychology links this to anxious attachment, a relational pattern that develops when connection in early life felt uncertain or conditional. When you're not sure that someone wants you around, when the history of your close relationships has included enough withdrawal, enough unpredictability, enough moments where you reached and found only partial warmth, you develop strategies to keep the connection alive. The apology is one of those strategies. It preempts rejection. It keeps the emotional temperature stable. It maintains the relationship by continuously demonstrating that you are willing to make yourself smaller in service of it. But here's what the apology cannot do. It cannot fill the thing underneath. It cannot tell the nervous system that it is safe. It cannot build the kind of connection where you don't have to manage yourself first. What psychology wants you to understand, what the research on anxious attachment and emotional hypervigilance and somatic empathy consistently points to, is that none of this was a mistake. None of this was weakness wearing the costume of politeness. Your nervous system learned in the earliest environments it had to navigate that this was how you kept things safe, that this was how you stayed connected, that this was how you moved through a world that sometimes had very little room for all of you. The apology was never about guilt. It was about survival. It was your mind's most efficient tool for managing an emotional environment that required constant management. And you are not broken for having learned to use it. You are not weak. You are not fundamentally insecure or irreparably damaged. You are someone whose nervous system calibrated itself to a particular world. and did so with extraordinary precision. The work, if there is work to do, is not to stop apologizing. It is to slowly, gently, without shame, begin to notice when the apology is real and when it is armor, when it reflects genuine accountability, and when it reflects a nervous system still responding to a threat that left years ago. You were never broken. You were built to survive the room you were in. And now slowly you get to learn what it feels like to simply be in a room without apologizing for being there. Which trait hit closest to home? Drop a number in the comments. Subscribe. You're in the right place.